there needs to be a ton of modernization at Virginia Tech. Everybody that I talk to, source-wise, mentions different versions of the word outdated or antiquated with Virginia Tech. They have to modernize as an athletic department. Chris, I'll go to you first. Where do you think this goes for Virginia Tech as far as the structure of this potential new coaching staff and athletic department?
Well, I will say the NFL model, and I put that in quotation marks, is kind of the rage for ADs right now. I think it's the thing that ADs tell their board. It's the thing that ADs tell their boosters that gets people excited. I don't want to say it like shows they're doing something, but it is like the mode of operation for ADs right now. It seems like to go this GM route, and like in some ways that makes sense. Like some schools are hiring GMs that are tied to the AD that don't necessarily oversee the head coach, but work in lockstep with the head coach to put the roster in the best position possible. And it creates more power for athletic directors who are at this point in college football severely outpaid by their football head coaches. So that's one way to think about it. But Virginia Tech specifically, like I would say, speaking of the word antiquated, they've been very far behind from a off-field staffing standpoint. There was about like a 3 or 4 month stretch this year where a personnel department at Virginia Tech basically didn't exist. Like no recruiting, no personnel staffers. They had been looking for a general manager for months and months and months before they finally hired one late this year. And I think that really put Virginia Tech in a difficult position going into the season from a scouting standpoint, from a portal evaluation standpoint, and everything else. I can't tell you why the wheels were stuck there for as long as they were, but they were definitely stuck. And it's something that people in that program and people outside of that program have brought up to me over and over and over going into this season. And I think we're seeing some of those results play out.
John, what do you think about kind of the way this is going with Virginia Tech? There's a lot of question marks about Whit Babcock and his handling of the situation overall with Brent Pry and sort of letting him and this goes back to the post Frank Beamer era, right? You know, it can be said that, quite frankly, Justin Fuente failed at Virginia Tech, certainly for a lot of reasons. But one of the main ones was, quite frankly, because Virginia Tech was too shackled to the past in Frank Beamer, and they were too stuck between eras, and they didn't really know how to transition forward, John.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think there's a couple things to think about here. One, I think to Chris's point, which is a really smart one, is that we don't know if that GM and coach model is going to work. We've seen a couple of it pop up, Stanford, Cal, Oklahoma. Like, you know, we just don't know if that's like the right move. It's kind of interesting that so many people are so into it right now, the way ADs are. And it's kind of, we go through these phases where everybody feels like they have to do this one thing, and that's where that feels like right now. So we'll see, you know, what comes of that. I think the more important thing related to that is I think Virginia Tech has to show it's willing to put real resources into the program. You know, Richard, to your point earlier, talking to different people around the industry, you know, they've made the point over and over again that they have not put the necessary resources to be successful. I think it speaks to some of the lack of staffing and personnel that they've had in the past. That they've had some NIL issues in the past as well. And so I think that when you think about how do you attract the right candidate, I think you're going to want to know, all right, am I coming in as a GM? Are we aligned in our vision? But also, am I going to have the resources to build the staff that I want, to hire the people that I need, to be able to go out and get the players that I need? To this point, Virginia Tech has not really shown that. And I think it's, like you said, kind of living some of that Beamer era. Hey, we're still going to get the best Tidewater kids and all that kind of stuff. And it hasn't really played out on the field. So that will be, I think, a big question mark when you think about as we get deeper into the process, when they start talking to potential candidates, they're going to want to know there's a real commitment to winning. And that means dollars. And I think if you can show that you have that, the path is still in the ACC. It feels open to people, but I think that's going to be a big question mark with Virginia Tech at this point.
Hey, quick question for y'all.
All that being said, Virginia Tech still, to me, the more attractive job out of the two, and more attractive than UCLA. And I think potential candidates would agree with that and probably feel the same. To transition to something else, as I'm sure has been the case for you guys also, have gotten a lot of questions the last couple of days. Who are going to be the top candidates? Who do you expect to end up there? Questions along those lines, which is normal going into this kind of process. And we will just throw out, it is so premature to make any sort of great guess on who is going to end up not only as the next head coach at either of these two places, but who's even going to be the top candidates, especially when you factor in, like Richard brought up earlier, that the fact that we don't even necessarily know who is going to be leading the way in terms of making the hire with the questions that are there with administration at both places.
I had a quick question, just kind of go back in time a little bit to the point that John was making earlier about investment. Y'all all talk to potential head coaching candidates. When you have those conversations with somebody asking if they're interested in a job, how many times do y'all hear the word alignment when they bring it up in terms of commitment and everything else? I know of coaches that pass on jobs every year, different situations, because they're worried about alignment. And alignment's going to be a big question at a place like Virginia Tech, which, to Richard's point, words like antiquated have come up. Like, coaches are going to want proof that that job is ready for them to be successful in. And you could definitely say the exact same thing about UCLA. I think both of these jobs have some legitimate questions to answer in that way to the best candidates, to the guys who have legitimate options. Like, you have to prove that alignment is there and the backing is there.
To your point, Chris, I think like we're thinking of Auburn, Oklahoma as the Jackson Arnold Bowl, but I remember Brent Venables, I think, publicly used the word he didn't like the alignment at Auburn, which is why he ultimately pulled himself out of that search and, you know, eventually ended up at Oklahoma. So it's a huge thing. Everybody talks about it. And I think that, you know, we're going to keep getting into it, but the instability, maybe, I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but the questions around who's making these hires, are these ADs on solid footing? That's a real factor, I think, in these situations. And also, there's been some changes. You know, maybe we'll get into it later, but UCLA has a new chancellor this year. That could change things. People think it might, or at least there's a possibility that it could change what they decide to do at football. You know, that's a real factor in, you know, who those people are making the decisions.
Yeah, two names to note for Virginia Tech are Jay Pearson and Ryan McCarthy. They are two members of the Board of Visitors Board at Virginia Tech, and they will be tasked with doing this. Again, like I said, Whit Babcock, the athletic director, said, and I quote, "I will support and advise the committee." That is a telling point, I should say, about the nature of Virginia Tech's search. And as Matt said, they're on a little bit of a different timeline. I'd say a lot of it of a different timeline here than what you might expect. Again, they're still putting plans together because the football coach and the football organization, while certainly the centerpiece, has to fit into a broader reorganization of Virginia Tech's entire athletic department, and then how Virginia Tech athletics fits into the scheme of Virginia Tech, the university. Like, there's so much existential to me about Virginia Tech's place in the college football world. That's actually why I slightly disagree with Matt about whether Virginia Tech is a worse job than UCLA, to be frank, because at least UCLA is in the right neighborhood. Virginia Tech doesn't know what neighborhood they're going to be in 2030 when we probably realign again in some way, shape, or form in college sports. Heck, they don't even know if there's going to be the same neighborhood that they're in. So it's
Richard, are you telling me the ACC is going to be gentrified, or is it going to get knocked down? Which one are you arguing for here?
Look, man, I live in Brooklyn. That's all I'll say.
I feel like Matt, sometimes we get Sesame Street on here. I feel like now we're getting Mr. Rogers. I want to know who's going to be in the neighborhood.
Yeah. So, Richard, you throw out two names worth knowing at Virginia Tech. Can I throw out two names that just are not worth really paying attention to that people seem to be throwing out right now? So, Shane Beamer, Michael Vick. So, obviously everyone, when you go into this kind of process, you see the candidate lists and people throwing out names that could make sense for the job. And I'm sure you guys have seen the same thing in terms of people throwing out Michael Vick, who obviously prominent alum, Shane Beamer, who has the ties that he does to the school. I just don't see any scenario right now where either of those ends up being a legitimate possibility to be the next head coach at Virginia Tech.
I think with Michael Vick,
just killing dreams in Blacksburg right now.
I know. I think with Michael Vick specifically, because I did report on this for us on Sunday, kind of in the wake of everything happening. I think, first of all, Michael Vick is something of a booster wish cast pick. It's the feel good, takes us back to a different era. I think there are some people who could envision Michael Vick as a candidate who's similar to a Deion Sanders or an Eddie George. You put great coordinators around him and you allow him to be the front for fundraising, etc. That's kind of the vision there. I think overall, it's probably a little too early to say Michael Vick would be in the mix for not in the mix, I should say. It's a little early to say Michael Vick would be a leading candidate. I would not put him as a leading candidate at all. I think there's a thing that happens in these coaching searches that is a little bit under the radar, which is the courtesy interview. And there are times when guys get interviewed to, I don't want to say do a favor, but there are sometimes when guys get interviewed just to get interviewed and to get interviewed experience. I'm not saying that's going to happen to Michael Vick, but I do think there is a class of candidate for a job like Virginia Tech that I think Michael Vick could be in, if that's what we're talking about there.
I do want to throw a quick follow-up into that, though. I'm thinking of a situation. So when TCU hired Sonny Dykes, they had a number of finalists, and one of the finalists was one of those kind of throw-in candidates at the time. It was Deion Sanders, because of somebody on their board of regents that really wanted to push him. And Deion got a lot closer to getting that job than I think anybody would have anticipated, because he interviewed so well and ultimately, obviously ended up at Colorado the next year. But sometimes those throw-in candidates can make some headway. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Michael Vick. I would be very surprised if it did, but it is something to keep in mind with those coaching searches.
And it depends what happens with the other candidates too, right? So it's you think about Arkansas, you have people pushing for Sam Pittman. At the beginning of that search, he had no shot of getting it because they were swinging big. And then they miss. You start getting back around. You got a couple boosters that say, why don't we just give this guy a shot? Let's pour a bunch of money into the coordinators, whatever. So I don't disagree with anything that's been said here. But if Virginia Tech swings and misses on 10 guys and Michael Vick's still sitting there, at some point do they say, do we just hire this guy? And, that's kind of how you end up with Deshaun Foster, honestly. But at some point, you want the program hero and you say, let's just give this guy a shot, and then can end up badly.
The difference changes. Deshaun had significant coaching experience prior to getting that opportunity, albeit as an assistant, where Michael does not have that level of coaching experience, even as an assistant to this point.